For so long, the Pokemon fandom has been split on the best path forward for the gaming side of this massive brand. There's so many different kinds of Pokemon fans, but I am adamant that I have the ultimate solution that would satisfy everyone. Pokemon games need to be like Grand Theft Auto. I've mentioned it in passing for years, and today we're going to dissect exactly what it means with the help of a group of creators who all have very different relationships with Pokemon to prove just how effective executing on a vision like this could be with any kind of Pokemon fan. My goal was to get opinions from as wide a sampling size of Pokemon fandom as possible. The creators I talk to range from people that love Pokemon for the vibes to people that are very in tune with the nuts and bolts of how the games work. People that just like Eevee to people that could critique your Eevee-IV spread and all of the gray area in between. I did this to get a read for the core of what Pokemon games have gotten right, what they get wrong, and hopefully laser in on how to move forward without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because while the games aren't perfect, and I contend they've always been subpar, they very clearly have something special that is impossible for others to replicate. I initially thought this process would cause me to, at least in some ways, reconsider or at bare minimum reframe my position, but to my surprise, after hours of discussions on this topic, I feel more confident than ever that Pokemon games need to head in a similar direction Rockstar takes with the Grand Theft Auto franchise. Now, some of you may have wondered, what could that possibly mean?
Guns, like Power.
And I get it. At face value, these two franchises couldn't be any more different. And if you don't put a whole lot of thought into it, the intended audiences aren't even the same. But in reality, the through line is there, albeit layered and complex. The most obvious connection we'll start from is their extremely rare status as media market leaders. Grand Theft Auto is a blockbuster brand. Pokemon is a blockbuster brand, meaning both of these franchises are intended for as wide an audience as possible. The only real difference is Pokemon games are carried by the greater Pokemon ecosystem in terms of cultural relevance, and as a result, almost always follow the Pokemon brand's ebbs and flows in relevancy rather than facilitating them. The Grand Theft Auto brand, on the other hand, is solely propped up by their exceedingly successful game releases. Only one of these two things stops culture when it comes every time, and it's wild to me that the answer has never really been Pokemon. That said, this doesn't have to remain the case. Grand Theft Auto does several things to ensure this consistent trajectory, and Pokemon could be replicating the most important elements, and the few elements that aren't one-to-one, Pokemon has an equally compelling solution for. Let's compare how the games are created in these two franchises. An oversimplified summary of the Pokemon game production timeline is that historically, Game Freak spends 3 to 4 years producing these games. For much of the history, the gaming community at large refers to game releases within Pokemon were split between two main teams within Game Freak. Between these two teams, there was a cadence of near annual releases that mixed between tentpole generation leading games, what were essentially definitive editions of current releases, and relatively modern remakes of past generation. The Nintendo Switch era brought about the relatively minor innovation that was DLC, replacing the admittedly redundant aforementioned definitive edition releases for the current generation games. But for the most part, not much ambition coming out of the Pokemon brand. Actually, I need to rephrase that. There's a ton of ambition within the Pokemon brand, but all of it can be seen in what started as and should be side hustles. Pokemon Company has made several major acquisitions in the interest of elevating and improving merchandise, film and animation, the trading card game, and in the case of the gaming world proper, the Pokemon spin-offs have been better received than the core releases for quite some time now. Grand Theft Auto, on the other hand, is the priority over at Rockstar. If there are any side projects to speak of, those projects are in service of Grand Theft Auto, not the other way around. Because of this, Rockstar is able to take however long is necessary to make the highest quality game possible. Not the highest quality game possible within an arbitrary time frame, not even the game that's the most likely to be the best of the year. Rockstar very clearly aims to make the best game anyone has ever played whenever they release a new tentpole title. Grand Theft Auto 6 has already publicly been delayed twice, and no one in their right minds would rule out a potential third delay before it sees the light of day. There's been quite a bit of speculation pointing towards a budget that exceeds $1 billion. Anecdotally, and perhaps ironically, this is the one place that we have some reason to believe Game Freak is beginning to understand the need to improve in this regard based on their last few projects though. ZA had a much longer lead up to its release than normal, which I would say is indicative of an internal delay, and most recently, Winds and Waves was revealed with a 2027 release window, which could result in a Pokemon game that releases over a year after its initial reveal. If that isn't some Rockstar stuff, I don't know what is. The biggest divide in the Pokemon community, I feel, is the way in which they are played. And while in my mind that diversity could be a strength, I'd argue when we account for the full population of people that purchase Pokemon games, it's not a particularly good thing. Of course, you have the extremes in the positive direction.
Even though I know about the discoveries, if it's been a couple years, and I'm playing Leaf Green, and I go into the Pokemon Mansion, and I find my way to the bottom of this tower, and I'm reading these journal entries, and I'm learning about little bits and pieces of these scientists and what they were talking about, and they're doing some crazy experiments.
On Pokemon Unite, I have 5,000 hours. Scarlet Violet, I have 600 hours. On Sword and Shield, I have 1,000 hours.
We got it! Shiny Zygarde?
Yes!
W.
All of the months! The months! On Legends Arceus, I have 105 hours.
I've beat a Pokemon game every single week for the last 6 years and something.
And though it's a lot more begrudgingly for me, I definitely fall in this camp. There's also the extremes in the other direction. How long on average do you play Pokemon games?
Usually until the credits roll.
And then you're done? You're out after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm done until there's a DLC and then the credits roll again. Like, I'll do post-game stuff, but not like, I don't shiny hunt. I don't deal with like the battle tower stuff.
I will do some dex completionist stuff, but typically I don't do anything crazy. Like I'll log on for like an event every now and then, like the Terra events and whatnot. Like I did a few of those, but after I beat the main story in Pokemon, I go back, I would say, for no more than like 30 hours max between that title and whatever like the next big one is. Not even necessarily like a mainline one.
I'd say 10 if I like the Pokemon game. If I really like it, I'll beat the whole thing, which would probably be like a 20-hour thing. If I roll credits, I'm never touching the game again.
Grand Theft Auto, on the other hand, I've never really seen a divide this drastic. Is there a variety of ways that people engage with the games? Absolutely. Does that variety fluctuate this much and hinge so heavily on how good a particular game is? Absolutely not. Mostly because the quality of game for Grand Theft Auto in particular has never been broadly in question, but also because Grand Theft Auto does a much better job at providing a quantity of quality experiences that satisfy the breadth of their audience. Maybe you're just in it for the core narrative and a side quest or 50. Maybe you're more like me and you just want to explore the world and be a psychopath for hours on end. Maybe you're all in and you're a multi-millionaire in GTA Online that keeps up with all of the new content, or maybe you go even further and dive into the world of GTA RP, which in and of itself can accommodate any number of branching playstyles. And it's something, I'll add, has been heavily rumored to be a very big part in GTA 6 in particular. And this difference is entirely owed to Rockstar's much higher level of commitment to delivering the most premium and exhaustive experience possible in a given gaming generation. They go the extra mile in everything they do.
Like, they made a tennis game to then figure out how to make tennis in Grand Theft Auto. They made Max Payne to figure out how the shooting would work in Grand Theft Auto. So now they just don't even bother with that. They just have thousands of people just workshop to then maybe eventually put it in Grand Theft Auto 6.
Grand Theft Auto is a market leader in pretty much every category possible when you think about video games. They push the envelope for gameplay, they push the envelope for visuals, they push the envelope for narratives. Literally no aspect of GTA is subpar. You will never hear a Grand Theft Auto fan hit the lamp shading move Pokemon fans constantly hit, talking about what their games could never be. The sky is the limit for Grand Theft Auto. No ideas feel out of reach for this franchise. Pokemon, on the other hand, has even its biggest fans resorting to begging for regression instead of modernity and ambition, because every new idea feels out of reach in this franchise. When it comes to reception, I'd argue the gap widens even more. I contend that while in the early days they definitely fared better critically on average, Pokemon games have never been anything to write home about when it comes to overall quality, and certainly nothing special in regards to contributing to the industry at large. In recent years, especially though, Pokemon games have become notorious, to put it mildly, very specifically in relation to their production timelines and overall quality. While it certainly has its contingent of dedicated fans, I don't think it's controversial to say this low bar for quality very directly results in most Pokemon fans becoming lapsed Pokemon game fans at some point along the line.
I grew up with Pokemon. Silver was my very first game, but I had watched the anime sort of religiously before that. You know, I've played every single one. I kind of dipped down in my late teens where I felt like it was getting stale. Diamond and Pearl, I played all the way through, and then Black and White came out. That was the first one that I had skipped. Eventually, at the time of Sun and Moon, I went back and played through Black, White, XY, and all those. And like, I really like them, but not enough to super engage with it. But as soon as Sword and Shield came out, funnily enough, despite all of its issues, that's when I started really liking it. And I think the biggest part of that is just the being able to see the Pokemon in the overworld kind of thing. It's just more engaging. The world feels more alive, even if graphically it has a lot of issues.
For the vast majority of their existence, Game Freak has gone out of their way to ensure that Pokemon games remain virtually unchanged. They add just enough from game to game to keep super fans on the hook, but everyone else eventually realizes they've seen this movie before and dips out. Pokemon diehards will talk your ear off about how big of a deal double battles were, abilities, the physical special split, Wi-Fi battles, and so on, because they assume they're not celebrated because they're somehow too niche or galaxy brained for everyone else that isn't drinking the Kool-Aid to understand. But the reality is none of these advancements were enough to appeal to people outside of that diehard bubble in a real way, because none of them are all that impressive. If we're looking at the franchise holistically, all of it is just plugging holes that existed in the foundation, and most of it created new holes along the way, many of which haven't been patched to this day. Conversely, Grand Theft Auto always innovates, not just within the Grand Theft Auto franchise, but for the entire games industry. And these aren't franchise-specific advancements that only the most die-hard fans of the series could point out. Advancements in GTA are obvious to the world because they always strive to move the medium forward. Unlike Pokemon, no one needs to get up on a soapbox to convince the world that a new Grand Theft Auto game is better, actually. No one needs to dig for diamonds in the rough, because the diamonds are very apparent and very high quality with Grand Theft Auto. And I know the common refrain, not every game needs to be Grand Theft Auto. And yes, I agree, not every game needs to be. Pokemon games should be though. While Grand Theft Auto is in a league of its own, Pokemon is objectively capable of fitting into and even competing in that hyper premium space for several reasons. Not every franchise has the brand value of Pokemon. Not every franchise has the cultural cachet of Pokemon. The iconic character designs, the dedication to world building, the decades of multimedia dominance, and frankly, the commitment to the brand that not just millions, but hundreds of millions of people of all ages have had to this brand over the years. For years, the narrative within the most die-hard Pokemon gaming fan circles on the internet has been that the problem is with those other Pokemon fans that don't have their level of commitment to the core games. But I assert that the problem is the games themselves. It's not a fan's job to lower their expectations to like a thing, and doing so doesn't somehow translate to being a more true fan or whatever. Obviously, there are people that only play Pokemon games. I'd argue most of them wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as gamers. Then there are Pokemon fans that are heavily invested in Pokemon through merchandise and non-gaming media that are gamers but don't touch a single Pokemon game after they played their first. The former tends to assume this is somehow a failing of the fan, but I vehemently disagree. It's the franchise's job to win over the most fans possible, and the reality is the group of people that cares about Pokemon but fell out of love with this state of Pokemon games for all of their shortcomings are in the majority. Games like Grand Theft Auto are massive communal events across not only genres, but culture that stop the world when they drop. Pokemon games, on the other hand, are lucky to get more than a week or so of non-Cerebi coverage, despite the fact that the Pokemon brand is so much more a part of everyday life for people around the world. It's a fact that the Pokemon brand is capable of having the GTA effect, despite the fact that they haven't achieved that level of ubiquity in a long time with the mainline games. They did it with the original Game Boy run in the 90s. They did it with Pokemon Go in 2016, and they're doing it to a degree with Pokemon Pokopia right now. The core games post 2000 have had varying degrees of relatively quiet successes that ebb and flow with other major developments in the brand at large, usually an anniversary, but nothing to write home about outside of that. To reiterate, in their current state, Pokemon games are obviously commercially successful, despite their general downward trend pre-Nintendo Switch, but they all feel like successes in spite of themselves, rather than successful games that succeed because every Pokemon fan, or even most Pokemon fans with some level of investment in gaming, feels compelled to play them for anything beyond an occasional stroll down memory lane for old time's sake, not generally to experience the next generation of a franchise they love and play regularly like every other long-running franchise of Pokemon's ilk. I think Game Freak and Pokemon Company could change that though. A change like this needs to start from the ground up. The brand isn't enough to carry a franchise on GTA's level. Grand Theft Auto games succeed in the way that they do because they deliver a quality product, not because the fan base has Stockholm Syndrome. And you can tell because unlike tentpole releases, when Rockstar mails it in with a half-assed port, you don't see publishers moving their game releases to compensate for the fact that they will be overshadowed when a mainline GTA game drops. You don't see these ports getting critical or even commercial success either, and that's how it should be. A franchise should be expected to consistently deliver quality to be embraced. For that level of quality, Pokemon development cycles need to be much longer, and if they are to achieve the level of quality the brand realistically deserves, they need to completely reinvent their model. I've said it for years and I'll restate it plainly here. Mainline Pokemon games should have a one game per console generation cadence, and in place of the current pattern of new games, remake, or DLC every 2 to 3 years on average, that all should be replaced with expansions for that one core release per generation.
That game has gone over 3 consoles at this point, and its replayability, even outside of like modding and whatnot, just like people that are on PlayStation Network, that are on Microsoft servers. In GTA, you can do a lot, and then also a big part of it, you can do a lot with your friends. They're still actively playing this, engaging with their friends, doing all the things that they want. They have a level of customization that you can have for your character and home.
Want to remake a past region? Add that region, new Pokemon, gyms, Pokemon League, and all as an expansion to the generational base game. Want to take us to a different region in a different time, a la Legends? Add that as an expansion 2 to 3 years after that.
Where you get to go do things from the Pokemon world that maybe you've seen in the show or that's implied happens in the games. But you know, the games are so focused on you're the trainer and you're beating the gyms and you're going through the linear route. Maybe if you do it a little bit more Grand Theft Auto style, then you could really explore the Pokemon world in more than just catching things and battling things, and then maybe one mini game, you know, a contest or something.
Give us more ways to play. Let me play through the game on a gym leader track, a Pokemon breeder track, a Nurse Joy track, and so on. And when I say more ways to play, I don't just mean cut to black and write a text box telling me I'm totally an awesome gym leader or whatever.
I role play every new playthrough, and there's aspects like trainer classes that has existed since the beginning, but I can't choose to be a bug catcher and have that be like a mechanical thing. Like, there's so many things that they could add to enhance these playthroughs.
And this is where spin-offs could come in handy. I don't want spin-offs for the sake of it. Do something more with those resources. You can make new Pokemon Snap, but I want that to result in better animations, NPC logic, more advanced interactions, and a vast environment that can serve as the foundation for a mainline games region. You can make a new Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game, but I want that to result in a personality quiz mechanic in mainline games that determines what mainline game town my character is born in, and potentially what skills my character would naturally excel at. Maybe the game thinks my personality is best suited to be from a jungle village and could therefore excel at being a Pokemon Ranger. And that would make my playthrough more unique to me, and so on.
They would have to rethink the way they build the story completely. What is the journey that you go, like, why are you battling? Like, what is the end goal? And what will you do to achieve that end goal? That's different from typical mainline games, like breaking away from that formula.
Game Freak and Pokemon Company have a vast universe with endless potential for interesting gameplay implications that if they were to actually pursue them, they could easily make games that are just as impressive as a peer like Rockstar and GTA. Don't give me the unrealistic expectation anecdotes. If a franchise like The Legend of Zelda can produce games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, a franchise like Pokemon could have a glow up, not just as big, but much bigger. They just need to want that for themselves and to know that their fan base would support something like it. And perhaps more importantly than all of that, they need to be willing to relinquish control over the parts of the process that they themselves have thoroughly proven to be bad at.
I would absolutely say Nintendo should let Game Freak make the Pokemon world, but they should have a different team make the Pokemon games. They've created one of the most fleshed out and coolest family-friendly video game worlds in all of gaming, in my opinion, and that's what draws me and lots of other people to it. It's rarely, if ever, the specific battle system or graphics or the general gameplay. The gameplay gets it across, but the world itself is what gets people to come and to stay.
Game Freak's strength has always been their ideas for the Pokemon world and their eye for character design. That is what I want them focused on. To take another page out of Rockstar's book, I want Game Freak to recruit every possible developer in their network to contribute to mainline games in a development capacity. I want a Pokemon game where the open world is designed by Monolith Soft, the combat is handled by Bandai Namco or Nintendo EPD, maybe Retro Studios provides general technical support. Get Pokemon Works on the game, Genius Sorority, every Pokemon and Nintendo adjacent studio available to them should be working on mainline Pokemon game releases, just like GTA games are all hands-on-deck affairs for Rockstar's stable of development studios. Pokemon should be no different. We already got a glimpse at what an arrangement like that could do. Just look at the success of Pokopia, both commercially and critically, after Game Freak relinquished some control to a studio that knew how to execute on a vision that they themselves did not. Don't get me wrong, I don't share the sentiment that Pokemon games, even as they exist now, have nothing to offer. I do firmly believe, though, that what they do offer isn't enough to adequately honor the legacy attached, and certainly isn't enough to be appealing to the very wide audience that's available to them. Love it or hate it, the core Pokemon games gameplay is a hindrance to reaching more of this audience. Not too dissimilar from how GTA didn't become what we know it to be today until they offered a gameplay experience that appealed to more than the die-hard retro faithful. Some people like to argue the current gameplay is necessary to appeal to children, and that immediately tells me that they only factor in kids that were raised by parents with traditional gaming sensibilities, because if you look at the field, kids are not playing games that look and play like Pokemon. They're playing Roblox, they're playing Minecraft, they're playing Fortnite, and yeah, they're playing Grand Theft Auto. The gaming habits of the Pokemon brand's target audience can be directly mapped to the gaming habits of the gaming field, because it's not just some niche JRPG that became a success because people fell in love with its turn-based JRPG combat on average. Some people, albeit the loudest people, did. Most people, though, tolerated all of that for all of the actual value, the character designs, world building. In 1996, having a game that allowed you to imagine yourself as a trainer in this fantastical world was the catalyst for all of this, and it was ambitious back then. However, no one should have to make up a better game in their head to enjoy said game in 2026, because unlike was the case on the 8-bit 144p Game Boy 30 years ago, Nintendo Switch is fully capable of a high fidelity, both in terms of visuals and gameplay, translation of this world, thanks not only to the available computing power being several magnitudes higher, but also, and equally as important, game design being much further along as a discipline than it was then. Obviously, there's a contingent of Pokemon fans that prefers the traditional style of games. There are JRPG fans that associate Pokemon with that style of gameplay. I firmly believe, much like with gaming overall, these people are in the minority, and as such have been holding the franchise back from evolving for the rest of us for far too long. I get new things can be scary. I get a lot of them have a lot of self-worth tied to the fact that a turn-based RPG was able to succeed to the level of Pokemon. But I'm sure there were top-down GTA fans that felt similarly about that antiquated style before GTA 3 came out. I know there was a contingent of old-school Zelda fans that still feel similarly about Breath of the Wild. In both of these instances, they are vastly outnumbered, as these modernizations of their respective franchises brought with them unprecedented levels of critical and commercial success repeatedly. Pokemon would be no different, especially since, unlike the aforementioned examples, an evolution in line with what I've detailed so far isn't something people aren't aware they want yet. Fans have been clamoring for a Pokemon anime-inspired MMO for as long as I can remember, and with the existence of Pokemon Champions, the traditionalists have a retirement home to go to in the event that they refuse to embrace a world when Pokemon finally moves into the 21st century. And let's not forget the 3 decades of games, both official and fan-made, they have to get their fix moving forward.
Plus, for the traditionalists, there are lots of other games that will have a dual battle system that you can just swap between. Final Fantasy, I think Solasta, but you can swap between like, I want it to be a grid-based, turn-based RPG, or just real-time bars filling up for attacks like Final Fantasy 12. Plus, they already have the turn-based battle system made. They could literally make a whole new gameplay battle system for a new game, and then just also tack on the turn-based system if that's what a specific player prefers.
Who's to say? Maybe sometime down the line they could do a new Super Mario Bros. Situation and make remakes of new Pokemon generations in that old style, so everybody's happy. Pokemon games should be cultural moments. They should have universal acclaim. They shouldn't be a laughingstock in Game of the Year discussions and award show seasons. They shouldn't need to be coddled by the people that currently love them in spite of their many flaws for what they do well. Game Freak very clearly sees modern Pokemon as forever games, but realistically, most people drop them within their first month on the market. That's not on the players, that's on the games. The Pokemon world is more than capable of offering gameplay experiences that feel worth investing in long term. The Pokemon world is more than capable of being fertile ground for real exploration, experimentation, and discovery. If designed right, new levels of attention to detail and a dedication to making a game that feels not only contemporary for the first time since its inception, but innovative and unique to the Pokemon brand. Something that would make the games worthy of including in conversations with the best examples of game design in the medium, in the same way franchises like Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, The Legend of Zelda, God of War, and Minecraft are constantly evoked in conversations like this. Right now, only die-hard fans of the genre and Pokemon superfans would even consider it as a Game of the Year level experience. But I think Pokemon could be right at home with the aforementioned franchises in every Game of the Year discussion moving forward. Games that are widely expected to deliver experiences on that level. I truly believe Pokemon games could be among these ranks if Game Freak and Pokemon Company took the correct steps to treat Pokemon games as works of art that are representative of their overall brand rather than interactive advertisements for the current real money makers in their massive conglomerate. I'm under no illusion that Pokemon games will get here anytime soon. I do maintain though that they do seem to be taking, albeit at times particularly clumsy, baby steps in this direction for the past decade at least. Hopefully, Winds and Waves takes the torch and ups the pace. Check out my latest video about video game anniversaries, and thank you to paid members over at shop.watchredirect.com like Trev L. Steinberg for making this video possible. Hit the link in the description to join in the credits of every video and to watch the full unedited interviews I filmed with all of these creators in this video.